Well, hey, biology, hope you're doing well when you watch this video. So this is section 1 in chapter 6 about chemistry and energy of life. And so in class, we talked about this case study, whereas like the Henan province in China and like that we read about these people who were short in stature, had like, didn't develop as normally as we would expect a human adult to be. And it's kind of like what's missing, and it was kind of like this story of like something's missing in their diet. And the key was they were away from the sea. And so this is cretinism. And cretinism can develop because of a lack of iodine in the diet when you're young, or especially when you're developing. And so iodine is actually used by the thyroid gland to make important molecules and enzymes and stuff like that. And so if there's not enough iodine, you're missing out on making the important crucial molecules to help you develop. And so this is called cretinism. And then it's similar to the thyroid glands also sometimes involved in this condition called a goiter. And so it's chemistry of life is very important. We talked about this example in class and how the lack of a vitamin or many vitamins can cause a lack of homeostasis. But this is vitamin C. Okay, and if you're lacking vitamin C, you get what the pirates used to get back in the day, scurvy, because fruits and veggies don't survive long on those ships. And so you start bleeding from your gums and sunken eyes and problem. But the treatment is literally just a really high dose of vitamin C. And so matter, chemistry, energy, it's this lesson, the first lesson in, well, that didn't work. The first lesson in chapter 6 is all about atoms and elements and how they're similar and different, and compounds and chemical bonds, which is crazy important. And then that also didn't work. Chemical bonds. And so it's very important to think about these things when it comes to chemistry. So not only like buildings, whatever building you're in right now watching this video, or the buildings around you, they're made of bricks and steel and various materials, but you're also made from chemical compounds. The food your mom ate when she was pregnant literally formed your tissues. Your body assimilated that into tissues through anabolic reaction. And so when you breathe, eat, or drink, you're using substances in the air to carry out chemical reactions that keep you alive. So the first job of a biologist is to understand the chemistry of life. The chemistry of life. And so the first thing that we talked about is atoms. Atoms is the basic unit of matter. This guy called Democritus, that was a weird shape. This guy called Democritus basically was thinking like, listen, you can't divide something indefinitely, like forever. If I take an apple and I divide it in half and eventually I keep dividing it in half, eventually there will be a time when I can't cut it in half anymore. And he called this word atomos, which means unable to be cut. But he wasn't right, because atoms are made of smaller molecules than that. Atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons, subatomic particles. And remember from the video, if you watched it, which the link is right down here, if you watch how big is an atom on YouTube, it's mostly space. The nucleus is crazy small. It's amazing, this complex world that God has created, complex universe. And so protons are positive, neutrons are neutral, and electrons are negative. Definitely understand that. Very important. And electrons, how they bind and bond, can form compounds and stuff. So the more on the atom, so there's some terminology here. Mass number is protons and neutrons. Atomic number is numbers of protons, okay? So here's carbon. Carbon has an atomic number of 6, which means it has 6 protons. And then its mass number is 12, which means it has, 6 neutrons as well. Carbon, we're carbon-based life forms. And so an element is a pure substance that consists entirely of just one type of atom. More than 100 elements are known, but only about 24 are found in I had you write this down. Make sure you understand this schnapps, however you say it. But these are the elements that make up the majority of life, okay? We need more elements, of course. We need, like if you can see right here, like you need calcium and potassium, you need iron for sure in your blood. But as far as what makes up the majority of us, it's this acronym right here. Okay, so element is a pure substance that cannot be broken down. It is just made of one type of atom. So if you add a proton to carbon, do you still have carbon? And the answer is no. If you add a proton, you go to nitrogen. And so protons are the atomic number, which sits right there. And so here's the periodic table. You'll have to memorize that in chemistry. Not in this class. You're welcome. So isotopes are atoms of the same element that differ in the number of neutrons. These are called isotopes. So as you can see right here, carbon 12, 13, and 14, they all have different numbers of neutrons. But notice this word right here, radioactive. Some isotopes break down and release energy. And those are called radioactive isotopes. They release energy into them. Hey, why is this important? Because we could use it to find cancer. And so radioactive iodine, radioactive technetium, I believe, or something like that. We can use that to find highly active cells, which is indicative of cancer, and during scans. So we inject the bioradioactive isotopes, and then we allow those isotopes to go where they go, and then we go through a scanning machine and pick it up. Of course, that's greatly simplified, but nonetheless. Compounds are usually very different from the elements that they form. So a compound is a pure substance when two or more different elements combine. Okay, so here's some examples of compounds: H2O and sodium hydroxide, sodium chloride. Hydrogen sulfide, I believe. Molecule, smallest unit of a compound. And so here's what's crazy. Sodium chloride, one of the most important compounds we need for our bodies to work correctly, our nervous systems. Sodium is a metal you can cut with a knife, and chlorine is a toxic gas. But when they come together, they form salt. So, of course, compounds are very, very different. And so the last part of this unit was about bonds. You have to know bonds, which ones are strong, which ones are weak, and how they interact. So ionic bonds donate. These are great note cards to make. All of this is note cards. Remember, ask questions on the front of the note card. Don't just say ionic bond, like define ionic bond, describe, use those action verbs that teachers use, right? Describe, compare, contrast, etc., so on and so forth, and you can look them up. Ions are electrically charged ions. They dissolve easily in water, and this is where we get electrolytes from. And then we talked about, like why athletes drink Gatorade, Powerade, high electrolyte drinks, because when you sweat, you lose salt. And so if those salts get into a different combination, and a weird combination, you will end up getting cramps because the homeostasis levels is inaccurate. You're missing some ions, and your muscles can cramp up and contract when they're not supposed to. Covalent bonds are the strongest because they share electrons. Hydrogen bonds are very, very weak, but they always involve a hydrogen atom because hydrogens are very small atoms, so therefore they cannot keep the electron. So in water, the oxygen is negative and the hydrogen is positive. Why? Because the electron is closer to the oxygen, because the hydrogen can't attract that electron very well because it's so small. It has such a small mass. And so geckos and lizards, they climb up walls and they have adaptations, these like pads right here. But those pads increase these interactions called van der Waals forces. So van der Waals forces is because even within molecules, there's like still tiny positive and negative charges because of different masses and movements and stuff like that. And so when molecules are close together, slight attraction can develop between oppositely charged regions of nearby molecules. So these intermolecular forces are called van der Waals forces after the scientists who discovered them. They're not strong, but they can hold molecules together, especially when the molecules are large. So in class, I told you to start this. I gave it to you in your notes. But this chemical bond right here, you have to know them, okay? And so notice that covalent is the strongest. Opposite charges in ions. A hydrogen slightly positive, that just means slightly positive and slightly negative. So when you have opposites attract with a hydrogen, it's called a hydrogen bond. Fats stick together. We saw that in our lab with vegetable oil and water. And then van der Waals forces are interactions of nonpolar substances, but you still have these like positive and negatives and these different charges, okay? And so these add up, okay? So you definitely need to know all those chemical bonds. All right, so that is section 1. I hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. God bless, guys.